Hi, I'm Barbara Bester, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
It's U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. If you think it's hard keeping your house clean, maintaining all those repairs, small and large, handling the guests when they come over, try running a house museum, where dozens or maybe hundreds of strangers go through almost every single day. Today, U.S. Modernist Radio talks with two house museums, representatives by internationally famous architects, Sarah Lorenzen of Richard Neutra's VDL house in L.A., and Cole Akers of Philip Johnson's Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut. Plus, we welcome back itinerant co-host Kate Wagner.
Yes.
And now, although Stephen Chung takes a Zantac every time I say it, here's your host, George Smart.
Hi, folks. It's springtime here at the studio. Tom has restocked the snack bar with new Cheetos. Here are the Cheetos right here. And Red Bull. Cindy Stratton.
Not a real name.
Is busy booking and researching more exciting guests for summer and fall. And we're heading into another record summer of absolutely delightful North Carolina heat and humidity. Thank you, global warming. Soon my house at a remarkable 404 feet above sea level will be ocean front. Or at least ocean adjacent. And I can build one of those monster 20,000 square foot houses with a mishmash of styles, maybe with a turret and lots of gables. Tom, what are they called?
I think you mean a McMansion.
Yes, a McMansion. How could I forget? And who better to advise me on making a life-altering mistake like this than the creator of McMansion Hell, one of my very favorite people, Kate Wagner. Welcome, Kate. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, George.
You've been pretty busy here lately, and I saw on your blog you sponsored a gingerbread house McMansion competition.
Yes, and it was absolutely delightful.
How many entries did you have?
43.
Holy cow.
It was so hard to judge. They were all just perfect in every way.
That's why there was a gingerbread shortage nationwide?
Probably.
So what kind of houses did they build? Anything come to mind?
Some of them were really funny. There was this one that made these really ridiculous Doric columns out of marshmallows and frosting that were pretty funny. They were bigger than the front entrance of the house. And then there's, of course, like a pair of people who went completely over the top with the sugar glass and like just immaculate detailing, like TV level gingerbread production.
Wow.
And then there was one house that was like a reproduction of this house in Texas that we called Mount Nub because the roof was so massive, and the gingerbread roof was also appropriately massive, covered in thousands of nonpareils.
Now, was there any massive gingerbread lawyer foyer?
Oh, of course.
Constructed?
Of course.
Yeah. Tell people what the lawyer foyer is, because that's my favorite feature of the McMansion.
It's a 2-story entrance with a giant transom window that's usually bigger than the front door. And it usually has a chandelier hanging in the transom window so you can see it from the street. And it's a big waste of space with a grand staircase. And it's got the only marble floors in the house. And it looks generally pompous and lawyer-like. If you've been to like a bank, for example, or a law firm, when you walk in, it's like these big, huge atria. And they are always maudlin and over the top, and the McMansion foyer is no different.
I suppose you could pop the top of it off and put a missile down in there.
Yeah, for sure. You could absolutely like rocket launch.
Yeah, sure. Well, you've also gotten some recent honor from the Library of Congress.
Yeah, my blog is going to be archived in the Library of Congress's Web Cultures archive, so it considers it a part of web culture and the historical record.
A cultural treasure.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
To some.
That means you got to keep doing it.
Yeah. It also means that they'll archive it for me.
Oh, excellent. Well, we've got two great guests on today, one from the West Coast and one from the East. Whenever I say that, I want to start snapping my fingers. Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, all right. Enough of that. Kate.
Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Realtor Angela Roll.
It's Episode 7, Modernism Awakens. In our ongoing space saga, rebel leader IKEA freighter pilot and former slave girl Angela Rohe has vanished. In her absence, the sinister 5-story Gray Building Code Alliance has risen from the faux balconies and granite countertops and will not rest until Angela and the last modernist have been destroyed. On her frozen homeworld, where the last Starbucks closed a generation ago, and the mocha frappuccinos had to be made without coffee and without mocha.
An awful planet, really. Not even a Dunkin' Donuts.
General Kate Wagner leaves a brave yet Java and chocolate-free resistance from her icy gingerbread fortress.
Hey, wait a second, is that me?
Actually, it's your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter.
Epic greatness.
General Kate Wagner is desperate to find Angela and restore design harmony throughout the galaxy. 4 solar systems and a planet over, General Wagner's daring, the rules don't apply to me, architect Frank Lloyd Wright is on a secret Starbucks run and discovers a clue to Angela's whereabouts at a price. Tune in next time when the 5-story Gray Building Code developer Lord Darth Vader's only son, Brad Vader, an orthodontist on the Wookiee homeworld.
Wait, do Wookiees actually need Novocaine, or can't they just, tough it out?
I don't know. We'll look into that. But back to the story. Brad Vader stops putting braces on Wookiees and finally faces his destiny and his father, Garth.
I am your father.
Back here on Earth, this century's Angela Rohe is your heroine of modernist houses, using her architectural training to specialize in modernist real estate, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to finding an orthodontist without daddy issues. Angela Rohe is your special real estate agent. Reach her at angelarohe.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Richard Neutra was one of the world's most important architects. He moved to the U.S. from Europe in 1923, and at the funeral of Chicago architect Louis Sullivan, Neutra met Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright hired Neutra and also the great Rudolf Schindler, and they ended up sharing space in Schindler's house on Kings Road in Los Angeles for about 5 years. When they parted, which was not on good terms, Neutra became one of the most important architects in the world. In fact, Time magazine featured Neutra on its cover and ranked him second only to Wright. Many of Neutra's employees went on to important success, including Gregory Ain, Harwell Hamilton Harris, and Rafael Soriano. Neutra designed more than 300 houses in California and elsewhere, where most of them are still around and highly prized.
Our first guest is Sarah Lorenzen, director of the Neutra VDL house in Los Angeles, which I believe stands for Vanderloo, although possibly it's the Vancouver Dodgeball League. I'm sure she'll clear that up for us.
So.
Sarah has no free time because she's also chair of the Department of Architecture at Cal Poly Pomona and has an active architecture practice. Originally from Mexico City, she lived in the UK before attending Smith College, the Atlanta College of Art, Georgia Tech, and the Hogwarts of Architecture, SciArc.
Do they have a school song at SciArc?
We should find out, Tom. That is a great idea. Note to self, find SciArc school song. Maybe a mascot. Along the way, Sarah won a Fulbright Fellowship, Graham Foundation grants, and Starbucks Gold status, among other honors. Since 2008, she has been the VDL House Resident Director, managing programming, educating docents, overseeing restoration, and keeping the place from becoming a McMansion. And yes, by Resident Director, we mean she lives there, which is so cool. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi. Architect Philip Johnson designed buildings, but he really thrived on being a kingmaker to the growing international and modernist movement. He organized the profoundly influential exhibition on the international style at the Museum of Art in 1932. It was the U.S. introduction of these important architects such as Corbusier, Gropius, and Mies van der Rohe. The exhibition also produced epic jealousy between architects. Frank Lloyd Wright withdrew because he was not more prominently featured. Rudolf Schindler was unhappy that Richard Neutra was more prominently featured. Yeah. Johnson and Mies van der Rohe later on designed the 1956 Seagram Building in Manhattan, which the New York Times called the most important of the 20th century. Later Johnson projects include the AT&T Tower in New York, which people have loved to hate for decades, PPG Place in Pittsburgh, the Crystal Cathedral in California, and a bunch of great houses you can find at the usmodernist.org website. One of my favorites is the 1964 World's Fair site in New York, created with Richard Foster. Johnson was the first winner of the Pritzker Prize, which is like the Heisman Trophy for architecture, and in 1978 he won the AIA Gold Medal. Few people know more about Philip Johnson than our second guest, Cole Akers, curator at the Glass House, the former home to Johnson and his partner David Whitney in New Canaan, Connecticut. Welcome, Cole.
Hi there.
So before we get started, I want to ask Sarah, does SciArc actually have a school song or a mascot or anything? Do you know?
Not that I know of, unless you count Tom Maine, maybe.
Is there a chant or any kind of school?
There are no sports.
I guess there are no sports.
Besides the blood sport of architecture.
Right.
No basketball team at SciArc.
No.
What's the sport in Harry Potter? Fidditch?
No. Okay, we're not going to talk about Harry Potter. Let's keep.
Okay. Sarah, when did you first visit the VDL house in L.A.? I understand there was a bit of criminal activity involved, something you would not encourage people to do today.
Oh, I guess you've done your research. That I must have said that at some point. Yes, the first time I came to this house was probably about 8 years before I got to live in it. And as a tourist, I came to the house as a tourist. The house was closed. But I did discover that there was a way in from the back. And, of course, did what many tourists try to do when they visit us, which is walk around without being invited in.
So were the police called? Did you go to jail? What happened?
Nothing happened. I sneaked in and sneaked out unnoticed.
So what was it like once you got inside? Was it everything you had hoped?
Yeah, it was an amazing house. It was in quite a bit of disrepair at that time, and that's something that we've been trying to remedy as over the last 10 years. But you could definitely still see the genius in the house, even with its dingy curtains and stained walls. And have you locked the back door and put up a fence or anything? What's been done back there? That was the first thing we did when we moved in, is we fenced the entire back area of the house. Well, Cole, the Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut, is not just one house. It's actually 14 buildings on 49 acres, right?
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about the complex as a whole.
Yeah, when Johnson first came to the site, he purchased it in 1946, starting with 5 acres. Originally built, what is called the Glass House, which is in some ways a misnomer in that it's really a glass pavilion that's complemented by a brick pavilion right across the courtyard. And over time, Johnson and later his partner David Whitney began acquiring more land to build other kinds of pavilions. So, for example, there's a painting gallery that appears to be subterranean from 1965, a sculpture gallery in 1970 that's sort of an inverse of the Glass House in that it has a glass ceiling and a completely opaque walls. And then the other features like a library, a pond with a little pavilion on it, etc. The buildings are all very different, aren't they? They are, completely. In many ways, you could think about each of them as representing Johnson's research into and experiments with architecture. So when visitors come to the site, they just don't pile into the 49 acres because the visitor center is off-site, right? That's right. Yeah, just across from the train station in New Canaan. So I'm getting off the train, and then what do I do? There's a little visitor center right across the road, and when you check in for your tour, the tour often starts with one of our really wonderful educators who give you a little bit of an overview of Johnson and Whitney and their lives. There's a video wall that presents lots of archival material that was designed by Pentagram when the site opened in 2007. And then from there, you hop on a shuttle, sort of like you're in summer camp, and up you go to the site, which is in a residential neighborhood in town. So you get shuttled onto the property in a van of some kind? That's right. Okay. So it's 49 acres in a residential neighborhood? That's right, yeah. When Johnson purchased the land, it was fairly pastoral, not much development around it. So he had the, very good fortune of being able to acquire adjacent parcels, and it's certainly unlike anything else that's on that residential street.
Sarah, what does VDL stand for? Why was this house built, and why was it important to Neutra and emerging architecture? Well, the house, similar to Philip Johnson's Glass House, is important because it's the house of the architect. So it's often interesting to see the house architecture that's built,
by architects for their own use, and that gives you a better idea of what they've been thinking about without the problems of having a client. So you get to really understand what their intentions were, what they were thinking of at the time it was built. VDL stands for Van der Leeuw, who was a Dutch philanthropist, a wealthy individual that Neutra met while he was touring Holland. And Mr. Van der Leeuw was very taken by Neutra's work and actually gave him the original seed money to build the house, which is why Neutra named the house the Neutra VDL, so VDL after Van der Leeuw, and then research, because it was supposed to be a site for experimenting with architectural materials and architectural ideas. So that's where the name comes from.
Neutra was recognized for his great architecture, and Johnson was too, but for a lesser extent. He was really known for introducing a new form of architecture, the international or modernist style, to the U.S. How did he do this, Cole?
Well, after Johnson was at Harvard, he had the good fortune of meeting Alfred Barr, who became the founding director of the Museum of Modern Art. And through that friendship, Barr appointed Johnson as the founding director and curator of MoMA's Department of Architecture. And through that position, Johnson organized a number of important exhibitions, including the International Exhibition, often called the International Style Show, in 1932. He presented to the American public for the first time modernist architecture that was developing in Europe. So Mies van der Rohe, Neutra, Frank Lloyd Wright, many other architects that were of this style that he was defining.
And I understand that Johnson took the show out to the Olympics in L.A., I think around 1932, and Neutra was a part of that.
Yeah, the show traveled extensively, including on the West Coast as well.
Sarah, I understand there's a VDL too. Is it part of the main VDL site that you administer?
Yes, so there was 3 houses built on this very small site, which is only 4,200 square feet, so a fraction of the Philip Johnson property. And the house or the property had development over 3 phases. The first phase was in 1932, which was the original house that Neutra built, which was a house for his family and also held his office. And then he built the garden house in 1939, which is where I live, which is on the back of the lot. And then the first house burnt down in 1963. And a second house was built on the original foundations of the first house that had built down, and that was completed in 1966. And that house was a collaboration between Richard Neutra and his son, Dion Neutra, who was also an architect.
So all 3 houses are part of the property?
So the first house, the only part of the first house that remains is the basement. It was built on a concrete basement, so there's a garage and there's a series of small rooms underground, and that's what remains of the first house. Although we do have models, and the tours of the house explain what the original house looked like. So when tourists come, they tour the second house, which was the 1966 house.
Okay. That's the biggest one, really, essentially.
So the first VDL 1 and VDL 2 were basically the same size. And then the garden house, you can see most of the garden house as you tour the property, but we don't. Since I live here, there has to be some limits to.
But I assume there are glass walls that people peek in at you?
Right. I'm like a caged animal as they walk around. I'm staring out at them, and they wave back.
Do they feed you?
No, unfortunately not.
No.
Cole, I understand that Johnson was an avid art collector, the Museum of Modern Art's second largest donor. What did he collect?
Yeah, he collected quite a lot of painting and sculpture. In many ways, MoMA's permanent collection, especially the works that came from the United States and Europe in the 60s and 70s, primarily could be attributed to Johnson. He gave over 2,000 works to the collection. That includes Oscar Schlemmer's Bauhaus Staircase from 1932, Jasper John's Flag from 1954, as well as MoMA's first Warhol Gold Maryland from 1962.
Did he keep all this stuff on the property, or was it someplace else?
A lot of the work was first housed in the two galleries on the property, the painting gallery and the sculpture gallery. Sometimes there were instances where MoMA's acquisition committees weren't quite ready to take on certain works. So, for example, Jasper John's Flag was thought to be potentially too politically risky. So oftentimes Alfred Barr would work with Johnson to have Johnson acquire those works and then later give them to the museum, which he was very happy to do.
Oh, sure. That's a good way around public outcry, right?
Sure.
Sarah, I have a question. So Schindler and Neutra were colleagues, and they lived together for a while in Schindler's amazing King's Road house with their wives. That's another great house museum you should all visit in L.A. We had Schindler's daughter-in-law on the show last year, who was wonderful. Now, she was one of the last people alive who knows Schindler personally, because he died in the mid-50s. Fun fact, she was also Groucho Marx's therapist, but I digress.
That's right.
So, Sarah, tell us about Neutra's last encounter with Schindler in the hospital. That's a great story.
I'm probably not the right person to get to tell that story. I just have heard it secondhand. But I guess it goes something like they were both happened to be in the hospital at the same time, strangely enough, after not having spoken to each other for many years. And there was supposed to be some sort of a reunion, but I'm not entirely sure how accurate all of the tellings of those stories are.
They didn't put them in the same room, did they?
Well, that's what I heard.
Oh, really?
They ended up in the same room.
Oh,
Schindler was dying.
Oh.
And they reconciled before his death.
That's the story.
Yeah. And I think there's a play I read that was been produced in either Palm Springs or L.A. that tries to recreate that hospital encounter.
That could be a really great play.
Yeah. I would go see that. Me and like 4 other people. We would all go see it. But, Sarah, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of Neutra's 1970 death. Are there any special plans at the VDL?
We have not planned anything, but it's a good thing. It's a good motivator for you to tell me that and remind me. I know that Dion is very fond of dates. He likes to celebrate birthdays. And
Dion, his son, just turned what?
92.
Yeah.
Oh. He's had a lot of experience celebrating dates.
Yeah, but he likes to celebrate both his father's birthday and his own birthday. So I am sure that we can come up with something to really celebrate the life of Neutra 50 years after his death.
And Dion, the son, lives right around the corner from you, right?
Yes, he lives a block away.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good. I mean, you got one of the original occupants right there.
Right. He comes in handy whenever we have a group that wants a little bit of a celebrity encounter. He will walk down and tell them stories of what it was like to build the house and live here with his father.
Cole, I have a question for you about one of Johnson's buildings, the 1984 AT&T building, which people either consider a work of genius or one of the worst conceived buildings ever, depending on who you ask.
Sure.
The top of it looks like a Chippendale bureau. How did this commission come about, and how did it get to be so different and controversial?
The building, in many ways, popularized postmodern architecture to the broader public. When Johnson had the commission, he made the cover of Time magazine and, in many ways became a major proponent of that style of architecture.
He bankrolled Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture through the MoMA.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And also, Denise Scott Brown always said that the pediment on the Chippendale building, on the AT&T building, was a side eye or like is influenced by the Vanna Venturi house, by the split pediment there. But I don't know how much of that is just inner architectural like conflict,
Trolling. Completely.
Cole, did Johnson entertain and have a lot of guests at the house? Because I would think with 49 acres and 14 buildings, you'd want to have some parties.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Johnson and Whitney, fashioned the landscape and the structures at the Glass House to sort of be a gathering place for artists, architects, many other cultural figures. The architectural historian Vincent Scully called the Glass House the most sustained cultural salon that the United States had ever seen. Figures like Andy Warhol, Merce Cunningham, Ada Louise Huxtable, Robert Rauschenberg, Robert A.M. Stern, all these people would come together to talk about architecture, but also appreciate the art collection that Johnson and Whitney were developing.
It was like out at Hearst Castle on the West Coast. Hearst would have these special dinners that you always treasured getting an invitation if you were somebody in California. And you'd make the pilgrimage out to the Hearst Castle and go up, and they'd have these long evening salon conversations. I can see that happening among the grounds of Philip Johnson's estate from all these folks coming up from New York.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in many ways, the Glass House, even though it's in Connecticut, it was very much a New York place in that way. Philip Johnson built it certainly to be a private place, but, from day one, it was very camera ready and used as a way to sort of be a power broker and to make connections between, many people from disparate fields. For example, the Glass House was the site of a 1967 benefit for the Merce Cunningham Dance Company. It was hosted by Johnson as well as the Menil family. And they had Cunningham perform, John Cage did the music, Andy Warhol had Mylar balloons floating about, the Velvet Underground performed. So it was this place that had these very high-profile events, as well as being a platform for these more intimate encounters, among smaller groups of friends.
Sarah, we're fans of past podcast guest Natasha Draba and her Association of House Museums, iconichouses.org. Can you tell us about the group and how VDL is involved?
So the group, was established by Natasha. And I think the original group that started it were Kimberly Meyer, and there was Wagner from the Frank Lloyd Wright from Falling Water. Linda Wagner, thank you.
No relation.
And a slew of other people, including, people from Barragan's house in Mexico City and the Mies house in the Czech Republic. And the idea was to create a way for all of these various, particularly modernist house museums, or sort of modernism through the present day. Then she called them iconic houses. And many of them are projects by architects for themselves, and others are for sort of well-known clients that are now in institutional hands. So they're open to the public. And the idea was to allow everybody to come together and speak to some of the similarities, some of the issues that we have running these kinds of buildings, and to share stories and to share resources, and also to bring a little bit of promotion to the houses through their website. I'm not that involved in the group, but we certainly are one of the members. I'm not really part of the organizing group, though.
Although it's an association, it's an excellent website. It's iconichouses.org, and you can go on and look at some of the premier house museums from all over the world. So, Cole, I have to ask you, I know Johnson had a reputation for being both generous and incredibly mean. He could throw verbal rocks with the best of them. Over the years at the Glass House, has anyone ever thrown stones? Has anyone ever, hurled a few through the glass?
Leave it to George Smart to ask the hard-hitting questions.
I'm delighted to say that hasn't happened, very luckily. Although at one point a turkey did run through the glass,
turkey?
which broke the window.
Oh, my goodness. Was he pardoned?
Absolutely. We have a lot of wild friends on the site that includes turkeys and deer and hawk and all these other wonderful animals that coalesce on the ground.
On a more serious note, then, I mean, is there a risk with glass that close to the ground, or is it higher up off the ground that animals will think there's nothing there and they go straight through it?
Yeah, we've not had, other than the one turkey, we haven't had any problems.
Well, if I recall from my 40-year-old WKRP in Cincinnati episode, turkeys don't fly. So
that is true.
Oh, I see. So the house is on a brick plinth, if you will, not too high off the ground. But I believe if I've heard the story right, and again, this may be apocryphal, but the turkey, I think, ran up the steps, in fact. So in any case,
wanted to be on a tour.
Clearly,
it missed the shuttle. It was in a hurry.
Right.
Exactly. That's right.
On the way to get out. Now, did it actually break the glass or just stun itself?
You know, from the way I've heard the story, this was before my time here. It did break the glass somewhat, but to what extent, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Well, please look that up for us, because this is an important fact-finding that we are working on here.
And our condolences to the turkey and his family.
I think he came through.
Okay.
Sarah, out in L.A., are there other house museums on the way? For example, did Frank Gehry ever move out of his house yet?
He is apparently moving into his new house. I don't know what plans they have for his own house, but it would certainly make I'm sure there would be a large pilgrimage of architect fans and architects wanting to visit that house.
Well, I'm sure. Now, does he design his own new house, or did he just move in someplace?
No, he's designed. It's a much larger property that was a house that was designed in his office. I think his son was. Actually, I think that was also a collaboration between father and son.
I'll have to look that one up because I've not run across that one yet. Sarah, other than the VDL house, what are some modern houses you really love to go through?
Well, there are certainly quite a few here in Los Angeles. The Eames house, which is, I'm talking now about ones that the public can go visit. The Eames house, which is amazing. You can choose to go on the grounds and look around, or you can make an appointment to go into the house, which is quite a treat, and it's really an amazing building. The Sheets Goldstein house by John Lautner, which was donated recently to LACMA, and that one is also, you can go visit.
And LACMA is?
The Los Angeles County Museum of Art.
Okay, great.
That house is unbelievable. It's sort of one of the most spectacular houses in L.A. I would say all the Lautners, occasionally they open them up. They're all pretty spectacular. Your audience will know the Sheets Goldstein house. It's Jackie Treehorn's house in The Big Lebowski.
The Big Lebowski. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure everybody has seen that. The other houses, obviously, are very close colleagues over at Schindler's King's Roadhouse, where Schindler and Neutra lived, and that house is really a place I go back to often because they really have a lot of programming over there. So they have exhibitions and installations and all kinds of events and functions and lectures. So like Cole was describing in the Glass House, both the Schindler House and the Neutra VDL House were used for many, many events during the life of the architects. They really were salons and kind of party houses, both of them. So we've tried to also create many events here, and certainly the King's Road House does even more than we do. And it's a beautiful house and a fun place to go to see these things that they put on.
The Schindler House at King's Road, and I think a couple more is that owned by the Austrian government?
That house is actually owned by a very tiny organization called the Friends of Schindler.
Okay.
But it's managed by the Mack Center, which is an Austrian museum. And they manage the King's Road House, and then they own two other Schindlers. They own the Mackey Apartments, where they host artists in residence. And then they own another house called the Fitzpatrick Leland House, which is up near Laurel Canyon, up in the Hollywood Hills. And they can't really make that house available because the neighbors don't like having people park there all the time, I guess, and it's hard to get people there. But they do have parties there. That's another good party house in L.A. See, I'm more interested in all the good party houses.
Yeah. Cole, what about in New Canaan? Besides Johnson, it really was a hotbed of modernism by a number of architects. What are some of the places you like to go around town?
Certainly one of my favorites is Elliot Noyes' house that he built for his family, which in many ways you can think of, or at least I think of it as sort of the glass house for a family of 5, in the sense that the house has 2 volumes, one totally opaque, the other totally transparent, connected by an outdoor courtyard. And when you want to, go use the restroom, if you're in the transparent pavilion, you have to sort of run across, even in the snow, to the other side. There's other wonderful houses by Breuer, by Frank Lloyd Wright, a lot of incredible places.
It's a whole town full.
Absolutely, yes. As your listeners may know, that New Canaan is well known for the Harvard 5, which were 5 architects associated with Harvard, Breuer, Johnson, and Noyes among them, who came to New Canaan because the building codes relaxed, the land was relatively affordable, and it allowed them to experiment. And at its peak, there were over 100 modern houses in this one town. So it's a very rare example of domestic modernism in the United States.
So are there not 100 anymore?
It's down to about 80 or so.
We've lost a bunch.
Yeah, they were not. Many of the houses were purchased for the land and then knocked down. But happily, in recent years, there's really been a push to steward these houses.
Sarah, right now, what's the biggest challenge facing the VDL house as an organization?
Right now, we are actually in pretty good shape, so that's good. We did have a lot of challenges when we first started, a lot of financial challenges, and the house really needed a lot of money to repair all the roofs, and there was a lot of deferred maintenance. From when the house was donated in 1990 for the next 20 years, there was not a lot of work done to the house, so that was a big challenge. We have done, I would say, about 80% of that work, and we basically do a project every year. So as we get a little bit of money, we restore a different part of the house. And right now we've done all the exterior work, and so we're moving into the interiors, which is fun because it's actually much more noticeable than things that we were doing previously. Painting is relatively easy and has a big payoff.
Yeah.
And versus fixing a roof, which nobody sees, or fixing the plumbing. So a lot of the things that we're doing now are very fun. They're making sure that the house is properly furnished. We got all the curtains back in, and really having it, look like it did in 1966 when it was completed.
Well, are they going to get you some mini blinds for your place?
We have curtains. We keep them open so that to not frustrate the tourists too much.
Don't want to frustrate the tourists.
Hey, Cole, a last question. I read, and this may no longer be true, but at one time I read people can stay at the Glass House overnight for $30,000. Is that true, and does it include a full breakfast?
It is true. It includes a dinner for 10 friends to eat at the house as well. It was launched some years ago in the Neiman Marcus holiday catalog. And we have had, very luckily, a few takers on that. Like many other historic sites and house museums, fundraising is certainly a main priority for us. Keeping up 49 acres and 14 structures certainly takes a lot of resources.
Well, I know I get dinner for my 10 friends, but did they all stay, or is it just a couple people staying overnight?
It's just 2 people staying over.
Okay.
And all the other guests are welcome to come for dinner, but then
they have to
retire elsewhere. Exactly.
We have to throw them out. We have a security turkey who's going to take care of that job.
Yeah.
That's right.
No other sleeping accommodations on the 49 acres.
That's right.
Well, Sarah and Cole, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to encourage everyone to visit these 2 house museums on our East and West Coast and explore the wonders they have to offer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, George and Kate.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll. your special real estate agent for Modernist houses. 919-995-0550.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover 7,000 classic modernist houses, and access 2.5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton, not a real name, is back at work and appreciates all your cards and letters. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Gild. I'll be back with George soon with another Don't Worry, Starbucks Will Never Disappear from Civilization edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.